Welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in all of true crime. And we've got the band back together tonight. Of course, before we get to best guests, Alex Murdaugh, as we know by now, went from prominent former South Carolina attorney to now a convicted killer of two people, his wife Maggie and son Paul. But the saga is far from over, and all this is just a fraction of the story. Best guess, Gigi Mi-Kelvey is host of the popular true crime podcast Pretty Lies and Alibis, with a pretty background as well. She has been covering the Alex Murdaugh trial from the get-go for Law and Crime, and she's breaking everything down on her podcast, Pretty Lies and Alibis. Steve Peterson was a senior special agent of the United States Department of Justice, the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, for nearly 3 decades, and at the time of his retirement was the most senior DEA agent in the world. He's now a South Carolina private investigator and has done work for Stephen Smith's family, and was recently just featured in the Netflix series about the Murdaugh murders. Looking pretty in pink, and I hope I don't get Me Too'd for that, Amy Lawrence Lovely fights for the civil rights of the wrongfully accused every day in her practice. She handles civil rights, police brutality, and misconduct, and criminal defense docket matters at the Lovely law firm. Lovely is, in fact, her married last name. She appeared on MTV's Teen Mom 2 and has been on the Dr. Phil show. And not here quite yet, but she is coming, is Cousin Eddie's attorney, the great, the wonderful Amy Zimmercheck. Until she gets here, we'll talk about matters other than Cousin Eddie. Real quick reminder.
Free Eddie.
Follow us on Facebook, Insta, Twitter. We are a podcast STS. You can also support us on Patreon. You can also get a YouTube membership, and check out survivingthesurvivor.com. It's something I have never really plugged. We've had it up since the beginning of this podcast. But guess what? Our chief marketing officer, a.k.a. my wife, is setting up a merchandise store, and we're going to have STS swag coming to you soon enough. I want to just say a quick word, having nothing to do with any of this, but our thoughts and prayers go out to the 4 Americans, 2 who were killed in Mexico. They were kidnapped. 2, as I said, have been found dead. A 3rd is apparently severely injured, and they all hail from the great state of South Carolina. South Carolina is taking a beating. Today, the South Carolina House actually had a prayer and a moment of silence for those victims. So our thoughts and prayers are with them as well. Please get your questions in. Of course, everyone on the panel is very well versed in everything that is taking place, and we're going to jump right into STS Nation. 2 cents. Please address Randy Murdaugh's recent statement to the New York Times tonight. Is Randy trying to hang onto his partnership at the Parkers law firm? Glad you brought it up. Randy Murdaugh spoke to the New York Times for like 2 hours while he was chopping wood outside his South Carolina home, which I thought was interesting. But the New York Times went to him, and he said he has no doubt that his brother was a serial liar and a thief. He said he also believed that Alec had not told the whole truth about what he knew about the killings. Amy Lawrence Lovely, what do you think about this, that Randy is speaking out so soon after the verdict, or maybe not so soon?
I think he's trying to send a loud and clear statement that I'm not my brother, right? And he's not. I mean, he's come to the realization that all those people in the stand and everybody that's watched that trial has come to the realization that his brother did it, right? So I think that's part of it. I think the other part of it is we all have people that we love that do bad things, and that's really hard to stomach. And he's also paid a price for it, not just financially, with his firm having to pay for all the stuff and all the things that he's done, but he's probably torn because he loves his brother. We love our siblings. And that's got to be really hard. And I think there's part of it that he's trying to hold on to what little bit of respect that he still has in the community and let people know that, this is what it is. And I'm not my brother.
And Gigi, the New York Times reporter, directly asked Randy Murdaugh whether he thought his brother carried out the murders. And his response was he still did not know. And he went on to say, as a lawyer himself, he respects the jury's verdict, but he finds it impossible for Alec, a man he has known for decades as a protective husband and father, pulling the trigger and inflicting that kind of carnage that prosecutors describe as a crime of cold calculation. You obviously covered this trial start to finish inside the courtroom. What do you think reading that?
I mean, I don't know that I blame him for feeling that way. I mean, he's a little bit different in the siblings in that Alex stole from him, and he's been affected by Alex stealing from the clients because he's probably had to take out loans along with the other law partners to try and repay these people. They're clearly doing damage control, but I have to say, Randy has not spoken out until that interview since Alex was arrested. And I just think it's very telling that he didn't say, no, I don't think my brother did it. It sounds like he probably is leaning more towards, yeah, he probably did it without saying it, because that's a whole other can of worms. Christmas would be a little bit awkward, right? If he were to say it and then, have a family get together. I do think his sister still supports him 100%. I think John Marvin is just heartbroken. I saw every day with him, did not hold back his emotion. But I think Randy's a little different. It's a little bit more, it's hit him in his business, and that's his livelihood. And, to have that last name right now in South Carolina can't be easy, much less being an attorney at the same firm that your brother screwed over tons of people.
Yeah, and he went on to say there's a lot to this, and we'll circle back to it. But he was also asked about he's taking on some of Alex's clients right now, which is, it's kind of really surreal to think about. And in response to being asked about that, he said, listen, I'm not him. I'm doing things the right way, always have. He says, I tell my clients, I don't beat around the bush. That's got to be, I don't know, quite the albatross around your neck, right, Gigi? But yeah, he's got a family to raise, and he's got a career still in front of him. So he's got to, to some degree, save face with that firm and the people of that area, right?
Yeah. And the other thing too that I noticed, he was there some, but he missed a lot, and he wasn't there for verdict, which that was so sudden. Even John Marvin didn't make it. Now, they were FaceTiming somebody at the defense table. Don't know who it was. Could not see, hence why I got glasses. And I couldn't really hear. It was muffled. So, but they did FaceTime somebody at that defense table. Maybe John Marvin, I don't know. But Randy was, out of all the siblings, he was there the least, and really didn't seem to kind of sit super close to the family either. I noticed that there was always a gap, but he sued Alex. So he sued him in 2021 for the money. Then Buster sold him gave him some farm equipment to knock that debt down to like 40 something thousand. So it's so convoluted, and the tentacles of this case and Alex just reach from the immediate family just so far out with all these financial crimes. And even Eddie and his family, unfortunately Eddie got caught up with, I like Eddie. I'm just going to put it out there. I like him.
And, speaking about something that kind of piques my interest is the victim impact statement, or lack thereof. There was no victim impact statement. Granted, the sentencing was scheduled literally the next morning at 9:30. But Amy Lawrence Lovely, and by the way, the great Amy Z, Cousin Eddie's attorney, has arrived. She has entered the building. But Amy Lawrence Lovely, and Steve, I promise we're getting to you too.
I was not surprised by that.
Are you surprised that Marion Proctor, Maggie's sister, didn't speak? Because she seemed to be turning to me a little bit on Alec on the stand. Are you surprised by the family's silence overall, and particularly hers?
No, and the reason why I say that is we watched her come to, in real time, the realization that she thought Alex had done this or had something to do with it on the stand. And I think that took everything that she had in her. I think the whole Maggie's family probably looks at it, and I'm speaking as a mother and not a lawyer here when I say this, but I think they're looking at that is Buster is their only connection to their little girl, right? And to get up there and talk about Maggie and Paul and against Alec would be almost a betrayal to Buster. And so in order to keep a relationship open with him and that connection with their daughter and their sister, it did not surprise me at all. Matter of fact, we talked about it the night before when we got the verdict. That's exactly how I saw it going, and that's exactly what happened.
Amy Z, we started off talking about Randy Murdaugh talking to the New York Times today. I'm sure you took a look at it, but he was asked, what he thinks Alec what involvement Alec had, and he says he knows more than what he's saying. He's not telling the truth, in my opinion, about everything there. But then he went on to say he didn't think he could have pulled the trigger because you can't imagine it. What did you make of Randy Murdaugh speaking out?
I actually did read the whole article. Randy's always been, to me, just a real hard to figure out. I thought it was very interesting, that he, said that he wasn't gonna, testify. I think that a lot of people are having a hard time wrapping their head around thinking that Alex couldn't pull the trigger. But the problem with that is that all the people that are thinking that, including you, Amy Lawrence, is that y'all are trying to put rational behavior against a crazy, or everybody is, even Randy, like a crazy person. I went back and listened because I was watching one of the jurors interviews, and they said, some of the things that Alec had said that had really just stuck with them. And one of those was that, whoever did it thought about it for a long time. And yeah, they did. Yeah, you did, Alec, thought about it for a long time. And he is so irrational, and he's such a sociopath that it's hard for people. Like, it would be hard. Well, it probably wouldn't be hard for Amy to imagine. It would. It would be hard for Amy to imagine me killing any of my dogs, right? Because I wouldn't do it. But if I'm hiding these multiple lives, not just this one other face, he has so many different faces that, and if Amy, as well as she knows me, if she didn't know that other face, she even if there were even almost a video of it, she still, I don't think, could grasp it. And I think that's what the hard time is.
I think it comes down for Randy, kind of like it comes down with me and you, is that I love you so much.
Right.
That I wouldn't want to ever believe in a million years, just like probably Buster feels that way too, that you could do that.
Right. You wouldn't want to imagine that. And that's why I think it's so hard. But I don't love him. And I've seen.
Yeah, I don't love him either. And I think he did kill his family.
And I've seen so many of the things. And he's just such a terrible human. But, it's got to be hard for Randy. And I don't think that him suing, he's never going to get that money. Unless he can somehow break the trust. But I think, like Amy said, he just can't, because a part of him loves him. He grew up with him for 54 years, the person that he thought he was, and so I think that that's hard. He let him around his children. And I think part of it too is that he wouldn't even want to think that if he could do that to his own child, he could do it to, his nieces.
That's real life though, y'all, right? That's real life. That's real feelings. That's really authentic. That makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're gonna circle back to this whole Randy Murdaugh New York Times article because it's interesting. But we got Steve Peterson here, who knows Stephen Smith better than anyone around. But 2 Cents has some questions, not related to that quite yet, but we're going to get there. Question for SSA Stephen Peterson. Do you think Alec was a drug dealer? How can you go to rehab for a few weeks and be cured of a 20-year drug habit? He is our drug czar, Steve Peterson. How do you answer this?
Well, I answer it with a resounding no. Alex was not a drug dealer. Alex may have had a slight pill problem, but he was not taking 50 to 60 pills a day. He was not spending $50,000 a week or a day on these drugs that he allegedly was taking. This was nothing more than a smokescreen to throw, if you throw enough bull crap up at the wall, some of it will stick. And maybe you'll find 1 or 2 jurors that will sympathize with that. And maybe maybe agree with that, but it was all a scam. There's no way he was using that many drugs. The prosecutor never even really pursued any of it. You know, where are you getting these drugs? I know there was a lot of rumors that Cousin Eddie was supplying them. I don't believe any of that.
So you think the number was totally made up?
Oh, totally made up. There's no way. Amy, I'm sticking up for your client.
I know. The problem is
there's no way you can divert that many legitimate controlled substances.
It wasn't that many. It was definitely not. I mean, he was definitely getting pills for him, but it was certainly nowhere near that number.
So if you are not getting them diverted, if you're not getting them from a legitimate pharmaceutical source in the US, then they're counterfeit. And if they're counterfeit, it's almost guaranteed at this day and age for the last year or two, at least, they're going to be laced with fentanyl. And he would have overdosed. So there's just no way. And then,
Steve, why do you think this figure of 50,000 a week was ever even put out there? Like, what's your theory on that?
Well, he's got to explain away this money. He's got to explain away the checks to Cousin Eddie. He's got to explain away all this money that's coming in and all this money he's embezzling and stealing. Where's it going? You know, we still don't know. I'm hoping the Phoebes, being a DEA guy, we don't get along too well with the FBI. But I'm hoping the Phoebes will be able to track the money. Follow the money. Follow the money.
Beach Girl writes.
Sorry to interrupt. I think that's the problem is that a lot of those checks were cashed and returned back to him. And that's the problem is that, right. And it wasn't just Eddie. I mean, you heard the little officer on the stand. I mean, he was one of about 8 people that I've been able to identify that were doing this, that were cashing checks for him, cashing checks. So he was writing checks to these people, and they would cash them and bring him back the cash.
Right. And he can't admit that. So he's got to come up with a reason why these people are getting all this money. And it's the pill thing. Going back to the question, how can you be such an addict for 20 years and go to detox for a week and rehab for 2 weeks and be cured? Mm-hmm. You know, an opioid addiction is probably the hardest addiction in existence to break. And, you know, my last year on the job, I spent my entire year seeking out and interviewing heroin addicts, offering them a way to get off of heroin in order to be an informant and trying to help them. And they couldn't do it. Didn't want to do it. So you can't tell me Alex in a matter of weeks is free. I would have loved to seen the blood toxicology reports on the hospital in Atlanta, the one in Savannah where he was brought up with a gunshot. I would love to see them. I'll bet you it doesn't even show the presence of opioids.
Nope, it does not.
There you go.
Amy Z is going to send them your way, Steve. Beach Girl writes, Gigi, this one's up your alley. Does the panel have any thoughts on why Alec took Maggie's cell phone? And right away, there's an answer from Kurt to make it look like the killer stole it. I think he found Paul's in the feed room and put it on him. Gigi, what's your take on that? Oh, you're muted. And I didn't.
Sorry, you need to read lips a little better there, buddy. No, I'm
sorry.
Choosing. No, I always forget to unmute. So no, I just think that. Wait, what was the question? Sorry.
Thoughts on why Alec took Maggie's cell phone?
Yeah, it makes no sense to me. I mean, why would you throw hers and not Paul's? Paul clearly was on his way more. Maybe, you know, I just, that's one thing that one of the many things I can't figure out. It just makes no sense. And then, you know, I thought we had heard there was some blood on the inside of his pocket at some point. You know, there's a lot of things that weren't answered, like the hair in Maggie's hand, things like that. Somebody also asked, Delicious 1920, do you think Buster will be able to have any sort of inheritance at the end of all this? He's actually set very soon, I think, to get over $500,000 from the sale of Moselle because he just recently settled his portion and his mom's estate portion of that civil suit with the Beach family. So he's set to get a chunk here soon, by the way. But I can't figure out the phone thing. It makes no sense to leave his there, propped up.
Yeah, it's always been confusing. He claims, Alex Murdaugh claims it popped out of Paul's back pocket.
Look, I fall all the time over flat surfaces and air, and my phone has never popped out of my pocket.
Ron
With no-
Weathers writes,
with no scratches or cracks
With no
or
scratches or
blood
nothing.
anything.
Blood.
Yeah.
You just set it right back on there. But he was going to do something with it, and then he stopped himself and didn't elaborate. But
speaking of Randy Murdaugh, Ron Weathers writes, and Amy Z and Amy Lawrence Lovely, ALL. I'll give you a shot at answering this if you're brave enough to. The other Murdaugh brothers sure seem to be mentioned in a lot of stories of cover-up, cleanup, and questionable coincidence. Do you think their lives will be looked into? Amy Lawrence Lovely, never one to hold back a good tongue lashing. What do you think here?
Hell no, they're not going to look into anything. Everybody, like in the words of Dick Harpoolian, we just want our trial so we can all put this behind us. Do you know what I mean? When he was screaming for his speedy trial, that's what he kept saying. And I was like, no true words have ever been spoken, because they want to shut it down. They want this to be the end of it. You know what I mean? And really, this is just Pandora's box. That's what we would hope, right? But I don't think that's the case. I don't think Brandy's going to get looked into, and I don't think John Marvin's going to get looked into.
Amy Z, do you agree? Z.
I do. You know, it's so funny. I was listening to I was on TikTok because I had some time to kill. And I was listening to these two people who I never heard of before. It's just hilarious to me how people just love to talk. But they had these two people on there that were talking about how, of course, SLED's looking into these things because they want to redeem their, reputation. And I was like, they aren't doing anything.
Tony Stack Sullivan writes, Master Stephen Peterson, have you ever known a person with a good, legitimate job, example, lawyer, doctor, to traffic drugs and put into a tough financial spot? Have you seen that before?
Oh, I've seen it. I've seen it many, many times. During my career, I put over 1,000 people in federal prison. Wow. And I tell you what, I cannot tell you how many times I would come back, I would come home, and I would think to myself, but for God, there goes I. Because here's a guy who had a decent job, a good career, a loving family, found himself in some hot water, found himself at a fork of the road, and made the wrong decision. And then once you get suckered in, it's kind of like Alex said. Once he started lying, he had to stick with the lie. He had to keep lying. And the same thing happens to these people. Good people that otherwise would never once would you think would be involved in drug trafficking. They come upon hard times. They come upon a tough situation. They get to that fork and they take the easy way out. And the easy way is never the right way.
And it's definitely not $50,000 a week.
There's a great documentary on Netflix called The Pharmacist.
Mm-hmm.
Seen it.
And yeah, and it's a great legit documentary. Oh yeah, because the FBI was heavily involved in that, and it
did not make DEA look too good, but that's okay.
No, it did not make the DEA look too good, but it's centered in the Ninth Ward in New Orleans, where I grew up. I didn't grow up in the Ninth Ward, but I grew up in and around New Orleans, and it's the definition of what we just talked about. A doctor who was a great doctor who developed an incredible habit, and she just started writing scripts for everybody, and they were paying her cash, and then she to feed her habit. And I mean, it was amazing.
Yeah, and that's what Dope Sick, the show based on the Sackler family, it's a very similar storyline. Elaine Stewart, since we have you here, Amy Z, you kind of touched on it, but this is a very straightforward question. Where do you think all the money that AM transferred to Cousin Eddie's bank account has gone? Was he laundering via Eddie? How can you answer this? And by the way, before you answer that, Listen to Learn says, I wish more creators would have Mandy and Liz on. And I have asked, we put the request in. They have an open invitation on our show. But back to that previous question, Amy Z.
Oh, I thought you were asking
Eddie money. Where did the Eddie money go?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean, the majority of it went right back to Alex. I don't know what he did with it after that. And I find it hilarious that the AG's office at one time, I think that they've kind of gotten away from that, but I think at one time they thought that somehow Eddie knew where the money went, but I don't think that they realized how many people Alec had lied to. And, so, I mean, I think we could speculate for days, but,
Amy, we've talked about this. I think the bigger question is we had an accountant with a gun from SLED up on the stand, and they were asking about all this money that Alec took. But you know what they didn't ask? Where did the money go?
Not one time.
You're a forensic accountant, and you're a prosecutor, and you're not asking where the money went.
Right.
So what they're not asking is more telling than what they are asking. It's because they don't want us to know. You know what I mean? And they don't really want the public to know. That's what it boils down to.
Well, I'm hoping that the FBI will be able to answer these questions when it comes to the financial crimes. I'm hoping they don't take the financial crimes state. I'm hoping they allow the FBI to take those federal, because you got a whole lot. Number one, you got to have a greater chance for penalties. Not that they matter at this point, but also the Phoebes, when they really dig into these things and they put their forensic accountants on these things, they can track this money. I mean, there's no better way of tracking it than following the bank accounts, following the money.
Alex Murdaugh is praying that the feds pick it up. You know why? Because federal prison's a whole lot better than Lieber or Lee.
Go to Estelle.
Yeah.
Go to Estelle.
That was my question. If it becomes a federal case and he's got the double murder conviction on a state level, would they send him to federal prison? He would be in state, right?
Not now. Yeah. In order to do that, he would have had to have been sentenced federally first.
That's what I thought. Okay.
So after he does his 2 life sentences in state, then the feds can send him.
The 2 consecutive life sentences.
Yeah, they got to kill him twice.
Right.
Die twice.
Yeah, we're not done
yet. Ways
yet.
Down the road. SH writes, Amy Z, how will Alec get legal representation if all of his money is gone? Harpootlian won't work for free. People have asked, is he totally broke at this point? Can he no longer afford the Poot Man?
So, he's definitely totally broke. He, however, John Marvin, well, I know. I mean, he's totally broke as far as everybody thinks. I think that I think there are many offshore accounts. I would start in the Bahamas, but he's going to get bankrolled by John Marvin. Dick doesn't work for free. And quite honestly, I think he's kind of over it. But I think Jim is in for the long haul with it. He and Jim had a personal friendship and relationship, and I love Jim. And one day he and I are going to sit down and talk about evidence, because if the problem I have is that if these cases aren't overturned, then they've made some really bad law for actual defense attorneys. But I think that his family will continue to bankroll him.
Judy Johnston writes something we all know. Gigi is so smart and very natural in her explanations and observations. And I have said this to my wife. I wish more reporters acted like Gigi and less like reporters.
Well, thank you, Jody. And thank you. I love what I do.
Amy Z and I are fangirls.
Oh my gosh. I'm fangirls of y'all too. Truth matters though. For me, I don't do the speculation and rumor. You'd be surprised how little I know about the Murdaugh's background, because I just really read what the authorities put out. And I just started Mandy Matney's podcast. Holy crap. Like, I knew nothing, zero. I'm like laying in my bed last night at 3 a.m. I'm like, I need to turn this off because I got to get up in 3 hours to get my kids up for school. I was like, one after the other.
Gigi, we're gonna be great friends after this. We're gonna have some late night powwows.
Girls trip.
Some margaritas. We're gonna FaceTime. It's gonna be amazing.
Just make sure you include Shaquille Oatmeal, my favorite name. He says hello. Look at these comments here. Look at this. True Blue, my favorite 3 guests. There's one problem. We've got 4 guests. So who are those 3? We won't ask.
I think they're the ladies.
Yes. That's my guess too. Morgan Music writes, Amy is my spirit animal. That is all. Followed by Jody, who writes, Steve is a badass. Of course he is. That's why he's on our show. And then Steve, let's get into it a little bit, and then we're gonna circle back around to everything tonight. Boomer Actual writes, could Steven, who was in the online sex scene, gotten killed by a John, and was his car truly out of gas and undrivable? Of course, talking about Stephen Smith. Steve, your response to this comment.
All right. Well, there's two different questions there. So let's address the last part first. Was this car truly out of gas and undrivable? And the answer to that is we don't know. SLED apparently attempted to start it up at the scene. They couldn't start it, so they towed it to the sheriff's department. When the Smith family went to retrieve the car some months later, when they finally got it out of evidence and went to retrieve it, a deputy met them at the impound lot with a gas can. They poured gas in the tank, and then they had to jump it, but it started right up. So was it really out of gas? Would it have started if they hadn't poured gas in the tank? They didn't try. So we don't know. We don't know. All right. So that was the second part of the question. The first part was some type of extracurricular activity. And Stephen did have a few aliases, and there was some rumors that he was involved. And I know SLED followed through with all of them. There was some evidence in his vehicle that indicated the identity of a person that Stephen had met with, and SLED interviewed them. And none of that was found to be suspicious. Well, suspicious is not the right word, but a credible a threat or suspect in Stephen's death. So the SLED kind of exhausted all avenues in that realm and weren't able to get anywhere.
And so we're circling the wagon around Stephen Smith. We'll go a little more in depth as the show goes on. And of course, we've got Cousin Eddie's attorney, Amy Z. So we're getting questions about that. This one from Jay Elliott. When is Cuz Eddie going to tell the truth about the roadside incident? There was no gun struggle. Just tell the truth. Alec wanted you to make it look like someone was after him. Amy Z, you're his attorney. How do you respond?
He's given many interviews. I don't know what part of it aired, but I know that on 2020, when he was on Friday night, I know that they asked him and he answered that question. Excuse me. There was no struggle over the gun. He did answer that question. But he was not in cahoots with that roadside shooting. I think that people will see very shortly that case isn't going anywhere.
Amy Z's got something cooking. Hey, from Sydney, Australia. Back to the New York Times article as we cover all these different topics. Randy Murdaugh, the brother of Alex Murdaugh, spoke to the New York Times. And something that he said concerned him is that Alec never really showed any concern about who may have committed the crimes, a la O.J. Simpson. O.J. never really was too interested in who the killers may have been. And he said, I spent considerable time day after day for weeks on end calling people, he said. But Alec said, he said, never did. Maggie's sister testified at trial to the same effect, saying she found it odd that Alec never talked about who might have been the killer. He did tell her, she said, that he imagined whoever had done so had thought about it for a very long time. Gigi, is it weird to you that Alex Murdaugh never showed concern, according to these people, for who the killers might be if it wasn't him?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I can't imagine losing a child. So my first thing would be I would be on every TV station. I would not be putting a deadline on the reward. You would not hear the last of me. I would not sleep until I found the real killer. We didn't hear that. It was a lot about him. And so I have to say, going into this trial, I was not convinced he pulled the trigger. It wasn't until about the last 2 weeks of that trial that it really started coming together for me, because I don't know a lot of the backstory. I don't know how these people intermingled or what they did in the past. I just really followed the murders. But I'm going to tell you, now that I've been home for a few days and I've kind of got my feet back under me, you do inventory on this case and it's like, holy cow. Like, how could I even think that this man didn't do it? I can't believe I was that naive for 4 weeks. But there would be times where I'd think, wow, but then my mind went to, what if this is a drug hit? What if he knew who did it, but he's protecting his family or something? Like, I was going through all these crazy theories. That timeline was so tight. And then you lie about being at the kennels. Any normal, sane person would say, I saw them at 8:45. They were fine. I come back at 10:06. They're dead. What's up? That's your timeline. Never happened. He lied about being there and seeing them for the last time. So none of that surprises me that he didn't, because he didn't want to find the real killer, because where would it have led?
Gigi,
And
that's one thing too. Sorry to interrupt again, but that's one thing that if he would have gotten on the stand and said, if I would have only stayed, so I could have been killed with them, or if I would have only stayed so I could have defended them or whatever, not a word of it.
Yeah, no, it's true. And I mean, all those things are, when you put it together, it's very telling. Very telling. He did not get any protection for Buster. I know that they recently released something where he said something about to get a deputy to Buster, but it almost seemed, it wasn't like I'm worried for his safety, more like maybe they should go tell him, because we know he called everybody before he called his son. So things like that, I would have hired people to be with my son 24/7 if I really didn't know who did this. There's just so many little things that when you add it up, it's like, yeah, smoking gun, walks like a duck, quacks like a duck. Quack, quack, it's a duck.
Yeah, and not holding on to your loved ones after they've been shot. All that adds up. But you know why you have hesitation? Because they had good lawyers, and you start to second guess when you hear these lawyers bringing experts up. It's all the lawyers' faults. I blame Amy Z and Amy Lawrence Lovely. Why don't you think Randy took the stand, Amy Lawrence Lovely? He says he thinks it's possible no one put him on the stand because he did not align perfectly with either side. Is that why?
I think that makes sense. I think that makes complete sense. I don't think Randy can make heads or tails of it. It's his brother, and he don't want to believe that he could kill his wife and child. Totally makes sense to me. But everything, everything logical in him and his lawyer brain says my feelings are wrong. And that doesn't play well for a jury for either side, the prosecutor or the defense. So why put him up there? We already had a bunch of witnesses that were not needed. Why put one more?
J. Thomas Reset, a friend of the show, a dedicated viewer, and he watches with his lovely wife. He says, I don't believe they think Alec did it with his own hands, in all caps, but I believe they do feel Alec had something to do with it. Maybe they're in a bit of denial. Brian Enton of News Nation and a friend of my chief marketing officer, my wife, interviewed Mark Tinsley. And Mark Tinsley said, and I quote here, and Steve, I'm going to throw this to you because you're sort of the outsider like me. You're the oddball, and so am I. And we're also the odd men out. And Mark Tinsley said, quote, there's a lot of money somewhere. He was cashing checks and doing something with the cash. We just haven't found it yet. What is your thought on all that? Where does it sit?
That's a great question. A great question. But a lawyer who is smart enough to create a company that has a similar name to a legitimate payee like Forge, a guy who's smart enough to do that, a guy who's calculated enough to steal hundreds, if not millions of dollars from clients, he knows how to hide the money. So I feel confident there's accounts perhaps overseas. There are accounts in other names we're not aware of. There's money floating around out there somewhere. I don't think he's got it buried in a swamp in the backyard, but I think he's got it. I think he's got it well hidden.
It wouldn't surprise me if it was buried. We're talking about the deep South. And in the words of Dr. Rhodes, as long as they still got mason jars around.
Yeah, but those pigs would root it out, I think, and they'd be afraid that pigs would eat it.
That's why they were shooting all the hogs. They're taking the money.
That's right.
And we are getting back to Stephen Smith, but Russell Lafitte, a South Carolina judge, denied a request Monday from Russell Lafitte, Alex Murdaugh's friend and the former CEO of Palmetto State Bank, for a new trial in his financial crimes case just days after Murdaugh was found guilty of murdering his wife and son in 2021. Lafitte was convicted in November 2022 on 6 financial crime charges related to Murdaugh's decade-long corruption scheme, totaling millions of dollars. Amy Z, is this just sort of the ripple effect? Because now he was immediately denied this request. Is that related in any way?
No, I mean, it could be, but it's federal. It's so different. And they didn't, because they couldn't. show the federal trial, like every day, like we watched the other trial. They couldn't televise, it's the word I'm looking for. But I'm telling you that the prosecution, people think that they saw a really great trial from both sides. If they would have seen that federal trial, it was so different and so properly prepared and protected, I guess. I feel like there was an issue with the jury thing, but I don't know that it was properly presented. Again, hindsight's 2020, and the Fourth Circuit is one of the most incredibly conservative courts that there is. And so I'm not surprised by that at all. And I really don't think that they even gave two thoughts to who his co-defendant was.
Mary M writes, I hope they investigate John Marvin and Randy and Buster regarding Stephen Smith. Well, we've got the private investigator who's looking into Stephen Smith's case. For those of you who don't know, who've been living somewhere where the Murdaugh news does not travel to you, under a rock somewhere, Stephen Smith was a 19-year-old nursing student and graduate of Wade Hampton High School in Hampton, South Carolina. He was found dead on Sandy Run Road in Hampton County back on July 8th, 2015. If I'm doing my math right, that's 8 years ago almost. A chaotic and confused early investigation revealed too few answers into his mysterious death, but the State Law Enforcement Division, otherwise known as SLED, opened their own investigation into this case while investigating the murders of Maggie and Paul Murdaugh in Cotton County, South Carolina. Steve, where do we stand now? I mean, I know you were on the show talking about it, but now post-verdict, where are we with that? And do you think there will be justice for him one day soon?
I pray that Sandy Smith gets some answers in this. She's been victimized brutally, both with the loss of her son and then all the smoke and mirrors and all this attention that she doesn't want focusing in on her all the time. I don't know what SLED is doing. There was a time where SLED and I were cooperating and sharing information, and that ended long before the arrests or the arrest of Alex Murdaugh. But, I think that I sat down with Sandy early on and I explained to her my theories in Stephen's death. And one of them was that the Murdaughs were not involved. Randy Murdaugh, the attorney who showed up at the scene when Stephen was killed, let's not forget, he's an ambulance chaser. You may not want to call him that, but they're personal, injury lawyers. So they're like dial all nines. They want to get everybody right out there right away. And, if you've got an accident, they're going to take care of you. Well, they've got people, pretty much all the cops are going to call them if they see an incident that could result in a large lawsuit. And if you've got a hit and run death, hey, as soon as we find the hitter, we'll have a lawsuit. We'll sue. So he runs out there. I think it was the luck of the draw that he pulled the call and he showed up. Now, I could be wrong, but that's what I believe. Randy did represent Stephen's father in a workman's comp suit some months previous. So that there was knowledge in the family there. I think it's totally coincidental, in my opinion. SLED told me when we were cooperating that that there was no communications. They've exploited all the communications between Stephen Smith and Buster, and they could find nothing. They could find no connections. They couldn't find out if they were communicating, how they were doing it, if they were meeting, where it was being done, how they were getting this. So, it's full of rumors. Yeah. And when I got involved, it was 5 years previous or 5 years after his death. You repeat the same rumors for 5 years, they become fact.
And there's a lot of comments in the chat section, and I'm reluctant and I haven't put any up, but you can look yourselves, but basically implying that there was a connection between Buster and Stephen. But you're saying we do not know that. There's no evidence to support that right now. You Matter writes, why was Randy on the Stephen Smith scene so quickly? Do you have an answer for that?
Well, I think I just did. I think it was the possibility of getting a lawsuit against whoever the hit and run guy was. You remember when they first got there, Hampton County first replies or responds. And they get there, and the coroner from Hampton County shows up, a guy who's no longer the coroner there anymore. He shows up with an assistant coroner, and they look at Stephen and they go, "This is a murder. That's a gunshot wound to his head." Well, nothing could be farther from the truth if you saw the injury. So Hampton County, which apparently does not investigate anything themselves, they decided to call SLED in because they thought it was a murder. SLED comes out, ooh, it's got a murder. The highway patrol shows up because it's a dead guy in the road. And SLED tells highway patrol, "We got this. It's a murder. It's not a hit and run. It's a murder." Highway patrol says, "You take it." Bring him to the pathologist. Pathologist looks at them. They do an autopsy. This is not a gunshot wound. They're not even close. This is blunt force trauma, as if hit by a car. So SLED goes, "We don't want it. Highway patrol, it's back to you." But highway patrol pursues this entire thing as if it's a murder case. It's not a car accident. It's a murder. Well, if it's a murder, why is the highway patrol investigating it? They don't have any expertise in this area. They interview everybody telephonically. They're chasing leads. They're the ones providing. The only reason I heard Buster Murdaugh's name come up repeatedly in the investigation early on, when I started to get copies of police reports from Sandy, not the agencies that did it, because they wouldn't share anything with us. When Sandy Smith gave me copies of all the reports that they had provided her, it was the highway patrol throwing the Murdaugh name out again and again and again. And there were people who were blogging at the time, putting out these blogs, putting on these podcasts that were promoting there's the connection between the Murdaughs and Stephen Smith. Everybody has their own agendas in this. And that agenda was to force the Murdaughs into this case for whatever reason that was.
Yeah, but this is the deal. When we have the same people coming up in the weirdest damn situations known to damn man, you know what I mean? Showing up at roadsides of accidents and people who the coroner says is a gunshot wound to the head and some say is a whatever. And then we've got people removing guns from places. And, you know, when it's the same damn people over and over and over again.
Hey, I'm not saying they're innocent of everything.
No, I know. But like when we have the same people, the same family, the same bullshit over and over and over again, where there's smoke, there's fire.
And I would agree with you on that. And from my perspective, looking at this 5 years later, now it's almost 8 years later, but looking at this 5 years later, when I first got involved, the only way you can find out the truth is you disprove as many rumors as you can. And then whatever you're left with, that's kind of got to be the truth.
I did personal injury. My firm does personal injury. Very proud to do it. We help people who are out there, hurt and broken and need help. And we do all those things. And I've never once been called by the police to come to an accident.
You don't live in Hampton County.
And then volunteer my services for free, right? There's something weird about that.
Yeah, and I'm not saying there isn't. I'm not.
Yeah.
My theory on who really did it, I have just as many questions because there's no puzzle pieces that all fit together. Each picture has different pieces missing. There's no complete picture. So you got two pictures of what could have happened, and each piece or each picture is missing pieces. So you kind of weigh the odds. Which picture is more clear? Which picture is missing fewer pieces? What makes sense? I was not able to interview anybody in the Murdaugh family. They wouldn't allow it. But when I interviewed other people that were involved in the other theory, in the other picture, I spoke with them. And based on their responses, based on their attitudes, based on their body language, no question we're hiding stuff. Are they hiding the murder? I don't know. I would say yes.
Maybe time will tell, maybe not. Who knows? But I like this question. I like some interesting hypotheticals. This is something I would ask you, Tony Stack Sullivan. If Murdaugh fled abroad, hypothetically, like Thailand, Mexico, what are the odds U.S. law enforcement attaches would nab him there. I hear the DEA is big there via the show Locked Up Abroad. Would they have caught him eventually if he fled overseas, Mr. Steve?
Well, DEA wouldn't, because DEA could care less about Alex Murdaugh. The Phoebes may chase him down. The FBI may go looking for him over there. But I think eventually, yes, he would have been caught. I think
He's
he
got
would have.
flaming red hair, and he's very unfortunate looking. He would have stuck out like a sore thumb, and he's 6'4".
Probably,
Yeah,
In
especially in
Thailand, he probably would have stuck out. Sandy Smith issued a statement post verdict to the media, and she said, "We know firsthand the agony and frustration of being in the dark about how a family member was killed, and I am thankful the whole story was put before the jury in a public trial. One day, I pray the same happens for my Stephen, but today we should honor and remember the victims of this man who so many people trusted." It definitely sounds like Sandy Smith, would like to see a trial, and maybe one day we will get a trial for justice for Stephen Smith. Maureen Kent writes, and Gigi, this is your wheelhouse here. In one of the jailhouse call recordings, Alex Murdaugh was telling a family member how bad the food is in jail. And he says something to the effect of, "I brought this on myself. I can take it." Did he confess?
Well, he confessed to at least stealing money from Tony Satterfield and his brother. So maybe he was referring to that. I don't know. I mean, sometimes people get so comfortable on these jailhouse calls. You see the progression as they go on. I mean, it's just, you got them talking about $60,000 to somebody to get Buster back in school. It's, so there's a level of comfort. Maybe he slipped up, who knows? Because he would say, we're being recorded and they're listening to us. But at the same time, he's like, well, the money was paid, so you need to follow up with him. I mean, it's just like, but it's Alex Murdaugh. I think there's still that little piece of him that just forgets he's in jail.
Well,
Peach
he always
Pie,
thinks
right?
he's above the law, always,
Yeah.
even in jail.
Yeah, right.
Peach Pie writes, simple. She has it all figured out. Talked Mags into leaving the cell with a golf cart to prevent actively talking when her first shot or calling 911. Forgot to return it to her after hosing. Felt it would look staged or wanted to create confusion. Do you agree with this assessment of how it all played out, Gigi?
I mean, anything is possible. I would not be surprised if aliens came down and threw her phone in the woods at this point. It's been so crazy. Like, you can't make this stuff up. I mean, I'm almost like, yeah, I mean, you could not write a script like this. I just don't think anything is predictable with him. There's no telling what he was thinking. I mean, even if you plan this stuff, I think when you see your son's brain come out of his head and bounce off the wall 3 times or the door and then land at his feet, you might not be thinking straight, even if you're an evil person. So there's no telling why he did some things like that, or just placing Paul's phone back on the top of his pants. I mean, if it were me, I would have just thrown her phone in the yard and made it look like she dropped it running. When you throw it on the side of the road, it looks a lot more suspicious, but
especially when they can track you.
Yeah, I mean, come on, people. Look, my brother, who does not watch true crime, he's like, look, he has been addicted to this case. I've said it on the show before. When I was home on the weekend, couldn't go to my mailbox because we live across the street. He said, come here, we need to talk about this Murdaugh. But he said, the one thing I've learned, if I ever commit a crime, I'm riding a horse and I'm leaving my phone at home. I mean, we've learned so much from Alex Murdaugh. To be a lawyer, he's a moron. Who writes checks for drugs? Alex Murdaugh.
We had an attorney in Horry County in the Myrtle Beach area who hired a hitman to kill his law partner, and he wrote a check.
Oh my goodness!
Get that guy disbarred no matter what.
I
Frankie
think that's
Figs.
tax deductible.
Yes,
I met his law partner.
Be a
I mean,
deduction.
I kind of understood.
Frankie Figs writes, Steve, this one's for you. I just want you to put this in perspective here. I think he had to have been into Coke, and I don't think they mean Coca-Cola, the other kind of Coke, with the kind of money he claimed to be spending. How much is $50,000 worth of cocaine a week these days, Steve?
Yeah, well, 50,000 is 50,000. Doesn't matter what you spend it on, right? It's still the same amount of money. But I don't believe he'd be able to put 50 grand worth of coke up his nose either. So
he'd be a dead man with fentanyl going around these days,
exactly.
right?
But if you notice in every video that he's talking, and he's not crying, we know that he's sucking back his snot. I really do think there is some validity to maybe he was doing some stuff up his nose, because every single video with
Gigi.
law enforcement, he is just, making.
The pollen is real in South Carolina.
Oh, look, I ain't even gonna lie, girl. I was on Law and Crime. It was a yellow haze, and it was flying in my eyeballs and up my nose. But we're from the South. I'm just sitting here watching Amy like swat mosquitoes and fruit flies.
It's fruit flies. It's fruit flies. They're making me crazy.
Yeah, no,
somebody commented on it. They were like, "Please tell me she's squishing bugs." I'm trying to squish them. I'm trying.
All of us in South Carolina, we know what you're doing, girl. We don't question it. But
I mean, I'm like, get out of my face.
It's the no-see-ums, right? It's the no-see-ums.
Oh, I see them. I see no, they're absolute fruit flies. But interesting, Gigi. I was going to follow up on that. So, Fitz News did an exclusive interview with this woman who asserts that she was sex trafficked for somewhere between.
I wanted to bring that up. I've been kind of reluctant, but I'm glad you did, Amy Z. So I can say you brought it up and not me. But go ahead.
Oh, yeah. No, dude. I mean, yeah. So I don't know. Oh, TikTok. That's where I saw it. I was rewatching that. I was scrolling because I'm really mad. There's somebody on TikTok that keeps saying that he's talking to spirits and that the spirits told him that Eddie was involved in the murder. And I'm like, oh, you don't know Eddie, but
it was a spirit.
He was not. But I mean, it makes me crazy. But so I came across that interview today, and she, I mean, for someone to say those kinds of things about themselves, in my experience, for example, like when co-defendants try to mitigate their involvement in something, I don't believe them. But when they, admit to all of these things, and she admitted to using drugs and, being in a prostitute and then getting into a sex ring, to me, those things, when people say those own things about themselves, it tends to make me want to believe them. And for her to, in her description of how he was nice and pleasant, which I think we've all seen. I mean, I hugged him when I went, or he hugged me when I saw him at the trial lawyers conference, 3 months after he killed his wife and son. I mean, he's pleasant when he wants to be, but she said that, when the doors closed and it was time, he got this look in his eyes, and the rage and his pupils were so big that his eyes were almost black, and the rage of him, violently choking her with, and she said, I don't know if it was the cocaine or what. Well, and we all know, not because we've done it, but because, we've seen that certainly that's a side effect of cocaine. And so I don't discount that either. But I mean, fentanyl and all the other stuff aside, his liver would not have been able to function on what the defense was trying to say was his, habit. It just, fentanyl agreed, but his liver, his body wouldn't have been able to handle it.
There is something bigger at play here.
Mm-hmm.
There is something so much bigger at play that we haven't figured out yet. And Amy and I have talked about this. It drives us crazy because we're really good at figuring things out, looking at discovery, dissecting things, looking at evidence. I mean, we're so good at it. People pay us to do it. I'm joking. We're really good at it, and we can't figure this out. There's this bigger thing at play here, and I hope that if this doesn't, I mean, everybody thinks that this is the end of it, but it's not. It needs to be the moment that it opens everything up, because the only way to stamp out darkness is to bring truth to light, and we got to figure out what's going on here, the bigger play. Whether that's human trafficking, drug trafficking, I don't know what it is, but it's something, and it's way bigger. And it's something that no one wants us to know about because nobody's damn asking.
Exactly.
Here's a funny question for Boy Mom 303. Poot reminds me of the Kevin Spacey character in House of Cards. Does Poot know that everyone calls him Poot and our nicknames a Southern thing? Amy, are nicknames a Southern thing? Amy Lawrence and then Amy Z?
Absolutely. My dad still calls me Turtle Booger. And I'm 42. Yeah. I mean, one of my best friends, his name is Boo. And he's a guy I try cases with all the time. So yeah, no, it's totally a Southern thing for sure.
By the way, if it's late at night, you're listening to the replay and you just thought you heard a ghost, that is Steve Peterson's grandfather clock. Don't be alarmed. Don't be alarmed. Momo Shark writes, was there talk about a divorce? Gigi, you're in the courtroom. You heard all the gossip. You're basically the equivalent of, when you go to get your hair cut and everyone, you're the barbershop lady. Was there ever talk about a divorce? Because it came up a couple of times and then never heard about it again. By the way, Jody Johnson, I can't wait for STS merchandise. My chief marketing officer is controlling some of the comments right now. She's in charge of that. And by the way, if my wife was an attorney, she would be Amy Lawrence Lovely. She'd be doing the hair flip and talking in the same way. So we are almost related there, Amy. But I just totally forgot what I was going to talk about a divorce. So, Gigi, was there talk about a divorce?
No. Maggie's sister testified that years ago, 15, maybe 20 years ago, Maggie had suspicions that Alec had rekindled some kind of a romance with a former college girlfriend or something. Apparently didn't let it go even up to the end. But, I really do think, number one, we heard the rumors before the trial that she had consulted with a divorce attorney and hired a forensic accountant. That would have come out in trial. That is more motive than what the state put up to me. And just the fact that they didn't talk about it. And then Maggie's sister said she was happy. Like, maybe not super happy with him, but content in her marriage because she lived at Edisto, didn't have to deal with that heifer a lot. So, I think that if it was true, it would have come out because that would have been your motive right there.
Here we go. Comment that the marketing officer just put up. A special shout out to Claire, who just became a Patreon member. The STS team appreciates you. We sure do. Followed here by Edie Purdy. Solicitor Randolph has been on different YouTube channels and commented on here. He's commented multiple times on here. Is it Randy, as he has stated, why talk about my family like that on Hidden True Crime channel? Personally, I think it is just someone messing around, having a good time. But I will take this opportunity to say that any member of the Murdaugh family has an open invitation to come on STS. We'll sit down. We'll do an in-depth interview. We might even bring on this gang to talk along with you, but we will certainly invite you on the show. The Post and Courier, big media outlet in the Palmetto State, had a headline today. Alex Murdaugh's double murder trial leaves enduring mysteries, even after the guilty verdict. And the essence of the story was, and I'll say it in my Southern accent, why did this happen? I'd love to get all your takes. Gigi, why did this all play out to begin with?
Gosh.
By the way, how's my why?
Well, it's good. Like, I'm very impressed. Now, if you just slap some fruit flies, or as somebody said, gnats, we call them fruit flies in the South, you'll be right on top. But, that's the big question. At what point, I really do think that in the beginning, he was living a lifestyle he could not afford. And then, so what do? You steal, you replace it. It goes on for a while, but he got deeper and deeper. There's a reason people that win lotteries and win $100 million end up bankrupt because they don't know how to manage. The more you have, the more you spend. They're taking private jets to get courtside seats at the Gamecocks basketball games and stuff. That costs a lot of money. So I really do think that, he just, look, I don't think we've heard the half of it with Alex Murdaugh. I'm curious to see what else is going to come out. I think it may blow our mind, but I don't think we've heard the start of what this man has done yet. And we've heard enough.
Yeah. Amy Z, I'm curious to get your take on this because the title is talking about, some of the collateral damage and the other trials that may come out as a result of this. Obviously, one of the big ones is,
and I don't know why,
is Gloria Satterfield. What are you expecting from a legal standpoint moving forward in sort of a ripple effect from all this?
As far as,
are we going to see a lot of litigation that's, a ripple effect of the whole Murdaugh saga play out now?
Well, so here's the problem is that, they hired these these two lawyers out of Charleston, receiver, the receivers in the receivership to find all the money. And so, they found what money that they can. One thing that Amy Lawrence and I talked about a lot, is that one thing that the state just didn't present that was clear and factual was that Paul stood to inherit from Randolph Sr.'s trust. And, and so that money would have gone straight to Alec had he not killed them. There were other, to get back to your question about the why. So there were a lot of other whys, I think, that would make much more sense than the storm was brewing kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But also, the problem with all the litigation is you can get judgments against, whomever, but you can't get blood from a turnip. And although I don't have a Southern accent right now because I haven't been drinking and I spent years trying to cure my Southern accent. That's how you know when I've had too much drink is when my Southern accent comes out. But the problem is that all, he has or had, so much money in trust and things that were protected that, it's really sad that even if there is a bunch of litigation, that the people who he stole from or who are owed money, they aren't going to get it. And then for reasons way beyond I can ever comprehend is that the Attorney General's office, I think maybe a few months ago brought some tax evasion charges against him or something. So what that does is that immediately moves the federal government and the state of South Carolina to the front of the line for any money that is recoverable. And that money then gets taken away from the victims too. So, I don't anticipate a lot of litigation because unfortunately, lawyers don't do this for free. I love, that Eric Bland has made this an issue, but he's made this an issue and he's made a good chunk of percentage off of it. Lawyers don't, a lot of lawyers don't just work without their contingency fee. And, and so they aren't going to file a bunch of litigation because they aren't going to make any money. And that's just the sad truth. I don't, and I'm not saying I've seen, especially like I've seen Amy's law firm not even take fees, because they want the people to get the money. But her law firm is a lot different than a lot that I've seen.
Yeah, unfortunately, it is capitalism. You have to make money, and that is the way things work as a result of that. The Journey to Justice writes, her nail tech said she did say divorce, and they were not happy. Well, she was not. She found it all out, if we believe her nail tech. And then LFT Decipher writes, appreciate these panels and discussions. Thanks, y'all. I have incorporated y'all into my daily vernacular now, and Steve Peterson will too, even though he's got that heavy Boston accent, which I love. Tried to convince him to become a Yankees fan today. He said no way in hell. Steve, you again and me are really the ones most removed, I would say. Have you contemplated the why question?
Well, I think part of it goes back to what I think Amy Z talked about earlier, is we're trying to find a logical, rational reason for what an irrational man did. And it's hard to do that. But now this is just my personal feelings. My feelings is that Paul may have had, if I believe one of my theories, Paul had something to do with Stephen Smith's death. I believe Paul had something to do with Gloria Satterfield's death. Obviously, Paul had something to do with Mallory Beach's death. Paul is a massive liability to the Murdaugh family, and he's not getting any better. Even after the beach boat crash, the death of Mallory, he's still going out, he's still partying, he's still drinking. He hasn't changed at all. And I think when reality hit Alex in the face from the law firm, from them finding out what's been going on, I think he started to panic. And I think he just kind of cracked. Now, why kill Maggie? I don't know. I don't know. But I think he saw Paul. Who else? How many other people would die years down the road if Paul was allowed to continue on, because he wasn't going to get any jail time for the boat crash with Mallory. He wasn't going to do any time for that.
I think he would have.
You're cracking me up, by the way, because you keep calling it Murdaugh and you're making all the commenters crazy.
That's the Boston in him.
And it cracks me up.
Look, when I was covering this for Long Crime, I tried to say Alec, but I got down to Walterboro and I got around my people and we were all speaking banjo. So it's like, it just became Alec. I mean, I call every Alex Alec.
I like call Ick.
Gigi, I noticed that transition, by the way.
Yeah,
Hey,
I gave up. It was too much on my brain to try to remember to say Alec. I call every Alex Alec. So there you go.
It's confused everyone, but I like Murdaugh the most. I like.
If it helps, my daughters even make fun of me. All three of my daughters were born in the South. And they're like, Dad, you can't say get in the car, y'all. It doesn't make sense.
Sure you can.
You know, have the two accents merging. You got to pick a side.
Funny.
Yeah, and stick with Boston.
Yeah.
That's more true to yourself. Hayoko writes, quite simple. Alec is a psychopath. Paul put the heat on him, and Maggie had hired a forensic accountant. They had to go simply out of spite or maybe out of necessity in his mind. Look at this beautiful comment. I can't say the name, but I have to say Amy is beautiful with that pretty and pink dress. But most importantly, she and all your guests are really such straight shooters and know their stuff. Thank you, Joel, for always having awesome guests. That is not just a tagline. Best guests is who we are. And we've got the best audience with STS Nation. Amy Lawrence Lovely and Amy Z. Eric Bland tweeted this out yesterday, and we had him on the show, and we talked about this. In South Carolina, only 5% of cases get turned over on appeal, and where a defendant took the stand, it is less than 1%. Any chance in hell on an appeal in this case? Amy Z.
Well, Amy Z is an expert at appeals because she writes them. I'm not smart enough. I can tell you this, what my 2 cents are. I mean, in order to have an appeal, you have to have things have to be preserved for it, and people have to object. And I did not hear a lot of objecting from anybody on either side. And all the evidence that came in was not objected to. Like when I think about the GMC on Star Records coming in and, oh no, Mr. Harpoolian stand there. We welcome this new evidence. And you're like, that's what helped sell the deal, dude. Yeah, not the best thing you ever did in your whole life. I think that's going to be the real problem. It wasn't preserved for appeal. Amy Z, you tell me if I'm wrong. I think that there is a better chance of post-conviction relief with ineffective assistance of counsel because they didn't make all those objections and do all the things they were supposed to. But Amy Z would know way better than I would.
So I did see Eric's tweet. I don't know what's the underlying data for his statistics, but I will tell you this. That's probably fairly accurate. And the reason is because people appeal guilty pleas. People appeal when they have no reason to appeal. So the fact that they, that the things that overturned are so low, may be skewed a little bit. I've had cases that I thought absolutely should have been overturned that weren't, and I can tell you that it was no coincidence that before he had to make a big ruling that Judge Newman would disappear from the bench, because judges, call other judges, they call appellate court judges, they call Supreme Court judges to say, hey, let me make sure I'm doing the right thing. Because those judges are very protective of their cases, of their verdicts.
And they want to get it right.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that a judge cannot stand. There's a judge that in this state refuses to let me try any more cases in front of him because he keeps getting overturned. I'm not going to mention his or her name. But he won't let me try any more cases in front of him because he keeps getting overturned. They're very protective of their verdicts. PCR, post-conviction relief, is kind of what's left after an appeal. And that's basically when you say I'm taking a page out of Amy's book, when your lawyer did a shitty job, they were ineffective. And because if they hadn't been so crappy, then it would have been a different case. And I'll tell you, Jim and his opening the door. Now, did he open it as far as they let it get open? I don't know, but I do think that this case will be a solid conviction under the appeals. Now, with the post conviction relief, I do think that, and those are not overturned as much as they should be either. But the first case that that we won a PCR on, my client was on death row, and now he's walking free, and so I love PCRs. We have another one that had a life sentence, and his case only got overturned because of PCR, and he's out walking free, and because of the PCR. And so I really think at this point a PCR is his only hope, and we're talking 7-8 years down the road before that even gets to that point.
Wow. Inga Majore wrote, maybe he was playing in Las Vegas. I thought that's interesting because, Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, it's easier to blow $50,000 a week gambling than it is on drugs, right?
Well, I'm not an expert in that field, but I believe it's just as easy to do it there.
Amy, back to you on this. Jay Elliott, roadside report was that it was a very superficial wound to Alex's head. Was there any proof a gun was actually fired? I can't tell if Amy's waving me off on this or what, but
no, I love it. I love it because here's the thing. And let's just I'm going to take I'm going to take a page from John Netter's book. Okay. Let's just use our common sense. If you're shot in the back of the head and you're standing on the side of the road, you're going to go face down into the flipping concrete, right? He was not shot. He was not shot in the head. He was not shot, period. He tripped, just like I believe he did on the lip of the feed room. He tripped when the gun was fired in the air and has a very superficial cut on his head. And I've read in detail all 249 pages of those medical records, including the toxicology, which is not loaded with opiates. And it's all, they all start off with, it's reported, a reported gunshot. And so hospitals just put that in there. There's no coincidence that Dick Harpootlian waves the same the 4 very redacted pages of medical records that I kept wanting to put in, because that's when the little x-ray tech was saying, gunshot wound. No, that's because that's what they were told. It's such a superficial wound. You don't, if you get shot in the back of the head, you're going down on your face. And
it was so superficial that when he came for his bond hearing that day, we were looking, you couldn't even see a mark on his head. It had healed so quickly.
It didn't even have a Band-Aid.
Yeah, my kids got worse head boo-boos hitting their head on like the corner of the table.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, than he did with a gunshot.
Shout out to Papa Bear in Moscow, Idaho. Our thoughts are always with you. 2 Cents writes, why would Randy Murdaugh give Alec a loan for, Gigi, I'm going to toss this to you, for $75,000 a few days before Alec's botched murder-suicide scheme? This was after Alec resigned from the firm. Why? Do these people not ask questions?
I actually thought that money was loaned before am I wrong? Was it before the roadside shooting, just like a day or two before?
I don't know. I thought
I think it was before.
Okay.
But, I guess maybe you like to think that, you don't like to think your brother is a victim, grieving the loss of the murders of his wife and son. But I think that was so close to the murders that even though if he had been confronted and this was after, you still probably that soon after the murders don't think he had anything to do with it. Now, he says now he was noticing Alec wasn't calling people and that kind of thing, but I'm sure in his brain, it was like, no way he would do this. Now, he's a thief. We know that. But there's a big gap between being a lying, soulless thief and being a double murderer. So I'm sure in the back of his mind at that time, maybe that was it. He just thought he was hard up. Clearly, if he's stealing money, his brother has to know that he's broke. So, but he's suing, even though he probably won't get that back. But that told me a lot. I did not know that until yesterday, actually. He was suing his brother.
Amy Z, to you, are Are you surprised? And I may have asked you this, so I apologize if it's redundant. In retrospect, that this was not a death penalty case.
Oh, well, I hate the death penalty. So I mean, I was glad that it wasn't a death penalty case. I was not surprised that it was not a death penalty case because, it was and is a circumstantial case, and I can't tell you how many times I've heard it said. I mean, I love to argue against a good circumstantial case, but I mean, circumstantial evidence is still evidence. It's not, but I'm not surprised that it wasn't a death penalty case. Death penalty cases are incredibly expensive. I mean, I would love to say that a tiny little part of me would have loved for it to be a death penalty case because Harpootlian, about 3 years ago when I blocked him from my phone and stopped talking to him, was he introduced the firing squad in South Carolina because we couldn't get the drugs. We can't get the drugs for the lethal injection. And I just stopped talking to him, period. In fact, when he would walk his dog on the street, he would turn the other way because I get so mad at him, because the death penalty is just so stupid. But in this case, no, I wasn't surprised, because yes, it was certainly a qualified case. There were 2 victims. There are 13 criteria, one of 13 criteria that you have to meet. Some people, meet multiple of those, unfortunately, but in this case, I honestly think that the jury possibly would. I don't think that they would really sentence someone to death on a circumstantial case like this, and those are so costly, so costly.
And a juror did say that she would not have been likely to go for death if it were an option because, she said, what's the harm in letting him sit there every day and think about what he did? And I agree with that. We had a case here, Amy, and oh my gosh, I cannot remember the gentleman's name, but Brad Willis did a great podcast. It was Murder, Etc. And he was on death row, the man, gosh, what was his name? And this is what really makes me very leery of the death penalty. But this podcast was launched. I know Charles Wakefield Jr., who was on death row for years for killing a deputy. And it come to find out this was probably an inside job. And this guy I don't know how many decades. And finally he's out thanks to this podcast. But then again, you see, they may have the murder weapon from the 70s. Oh, it disappeared. So you know what I'm saying? It's like, for reasons like that, I'm very skeptical about death. Now, somebody admits that they tortured a kid, I'm a little bit less inclined to say no, but it's very scary when you have people like Mr. Wakefield who are innocent, set up. It was the South. It was the 70s. It was definitely easy to do. It was a racial thing. And it's just mortifying to think, what if that man had been put to death because he was innocent? So I agree with you on that. It's just life in prison, I think is worse. And the honest truth, unless you live in Texas, the chances of you getting put to death, it's kind of like it's decades and decades. It's really a life sentence for the most part anyway these days.
Yeah. South Carolina, they're in the Midwest and in Texas, we see they give out the death penalty like it's candy.
Mm-hmm.
And which is insane to me. Like, I'm at trial lawyers college in Wyoming with all these great attorneys. And they're like, oh yeah, I'm working. All I do is death penalty mitigation and death penalty cases. And I'm like, where? It's like Kansas, right? Or Minnesota or whatever. And we just get it wrong so often. And it's a permanent answer to something that we're getting wrong all the time. I have a friend who was on death row for 24 years for a crime he didn't commit. And it ended up getting overturned. And when they described the man who did this crime, this murder, it was a light-skinned, short guy, and this guy is as dark can be. Said, I've never been so happy to have dark skin in my whole life. And he's 6'3", 6'4". He was exactly opposite, but they gave him the death penalty.
Was he exonerated based on DNA?
He was exonerated on a lot of things, a bunch of stuff. And now he runs the Miracle of Innocence, which is an exoneration project where he helps people who are exonerated, because that's a very small little group. And he's the pastor of one of the largest churches you can imagine. And he took it and did something really amazing with it. But not everybody gets that luxury, to get it overturned. So we just get it wrong so often.
Unfabulous Life of Kim. Right back to you, Amy Z. We'll wrap it up in just a minute or two here. Do they have any actual evidence against Eddie in the roadside case? It seems a charge based on Alex's lies. Your response?
One day, I can't answer that question yes or no because it's still pending. But this is what I will say. One day, when there are books written about this, it'll come out, that there were many people, not just Eddie, doing the things that Eddie was doing. Now, was Eddie on the side of the road? Yes. I just don't anticipate that they even can go forward with this case. I don't anticipate that they can try it. The only other witness is Alex. He's not getting on the stand again. I can assure you of that. Plus, not one thing he says is true.
Free Eddie.
Yes, free Eddie. I literally just got another email from him just now from Eddie. But
tell him we said hello.
Yeah.
He literally at the last line of his email, and I'm not breaking attorney-client privilege with this, but it may have been suggested that I stop talking about his case and work on getting him out of jail at 8:26 at night.
Amy, explain to the audience, because they're going to be like, what the hell? How is Eddie in jail emailing you? Explain that to the audience.
Eddie's listening to STS right now, I think. And by the way, Jules subbed and shared. Thank you. And look at this. And we're going to get to that comment in a second. Ty's Kitchen. Yeah, y'all should hit the like now in my best Southern accent. By the way, my 3-year-old boy came to me with sad eyes and said, you always talk about V and Z, the 7 and 8-year-old, and you never mentioned me. So I'm mentioning my 3-year-old, and I'm going to play this back for him. Little J-Mac, he wants you to like for him, not for dad.
We love you, J-Mac.
Oh, J-Mac.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, Amy Z. I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No. Oh, I've been doing it all night. When they're in jail, they have, thank goodness, because it's really hard for me to get to. I have clients in jail. That really makes me sound like a shitty lawyer. I have clients that are in jail from Horry County to Charleston to Aiken to Lexington to a lot of places. And it's really hard for me to go and see these people in jail. And the phone calls are ridiculously expensive. They don't record mine because I register all my numbers. So, but what they've done in the last, not that long, like 2 or 3 years, maybe a little bit longer, but I've mostly been active on it the last 2 or 3 years, is they can purchase a tablet and then they can send emails through when it's to attorneys and you register your emails. It's completely protected communication between he and I. And so it's really great. And I hope, it's my goal that, on Monday that he is out.
Nice.
So.
ASBO or ASBO. Gigi is a little gem. Yes, she is.
Y'all are so sweet. Thank you for your nice comments. I've been reading them the whole time.
Oh, very nice.
Ask my kids if I'm nice, though.
Cypher here, 777. This question has come up a lot, which I'm reluctant to post, but I will ask Steve. Any chance AM, knowing his personality, being a former DEA guy and a profiler of sorts, an observer of human nature, is what you did in a lot of regards, you think he's the kind of guy that would take his own life in the clink?
I don't think it's really settled into him yet that he's going to be in prison the rest of his life. I think he's so narcissistic. He thinks they're just around the corner. That something's going to happen to clear his name, get him out of jail. He and OJ will golf around the world searching for murderers, and he'll be out again. I really don't think he sees this as finality for him.
I thought about that prison door shutting the first night. And by the way, we're doing a show. I think we're going to do it Saturday at noon. We're going to have 3 ex-cons all served hard time. One for murder. They're going to take us inside prison life and what is going on with Alex Murdaugh day after day right now. From the minute he wakes up in the morning to the minute he goes to bed. These guys have lived it. They're going to be on STS Nation again. I think it's going to be Saturday at noon. I'll tweet it all out and let you guys know. But first, I must clarify. Jody Johnston says, Joel, I'm a good friend of the show. I know you are, and you called me Judy, but I could never be mad at you. I am going to deflect that and say that it was my Jersey accent. And I actually called you Jody, and you thought I said Judy. But if I did say Judy, I apologize greatly. Before I let this esteemed panel leave, I've been asking this question. And by the way, shout out to LFT Decipher. She became a YouTube member. Thank you so much. That's awesome. I like to see the glass half full, even though my wife and mother would say otherwise. But it was a long, hard 6 weeks. Amy Z, we'll start with you on this. Is there a positive takeaway from this whole ordeal that you have left with?
So yes, let's find some positive. So the 22-year-old juror who is wearing his Constitution tie like nobody's business and doing all of these reports, he, no matter how many times he's asked the questions, and no matter and no matter who's asking him the questions, he said that it was my job as a juror to not make my determination on one thing only, or in the beginning or in the end. I listened to everything. Everything was important. So, and maybe he's just blowing smoke up our ass, but if he is, keep blowing it, baby, because I love the fact that he took his oath so very seriously. And I get jaded because I feel like jurors sometimes have ulterior motives or just don't want to be there. And so for me, the positive was that at least this one juror who was speaking out was so committed to his civil duty that, I mean, I'm not going to stop trying cases, but I'm going to keep working as hard and maybe even a little harder to know that there are jurors out there like that.
Well, I'll tell you, I watched him every day. We nicknamed him GQ because he always came in dressed in his blazer and his nice shirt. That young man literally was engrossed with every single prosecution and defense witness. He took it. It was so clear to all of us, and they all did. I have to give him that. We got Kleenex thing, which is questionable, but as a whole, this young man was so invested, and just, it looked like he hung on every single word of every witness. I was blown away. He's the same age as Paul was when Paul got murdered. So he had that kind of insight, I think, into where is he right now. He's 22. He's probably, he went to Clemson, I believe. And so I'm sure that weighed on him as well. But I'm going to tell you right now, that young man just impressed every single one of us that were in there every day. He never came in looking tired or never looked bored. So
By the
yeah,
way,
I agree with you 100%.
Whatever happened to Miss Juror with the tissues in her ears and blanket on her head?
She came back out for the verdict, or was it was the verdict? Yeah, she didn't come for sentencing. But with the verdict, they asked her if she wanted to sit in the jury box, and she said no. So she stood right in the door.
Right at that. Oh.
She just stood in the doorway. She did not seem very happy. That was just kind of my feel. I'm not saying that that's how she felt, but it seemed like, it's a deliberation. She heard all the evidence, didn't get to actually deliberate. I don't know, but look, she kept me entertained. I definitely don't think poorly of her. There were days where we were on the struggle bus to stay awake, especially after lunch, but man.
And by the way, Gigi, juror 785, she's a juror that was dismissed right before deliberations. I understand there was a statement put out by her or her attorney today. What did we find out?
Yeah. So apparently, man, bless her heart. I felt so bad for her because, they just paraded her in there in front of a packed courthouse and called her out for, apparently she thought that Alec was not guilty. But so Joe McCullough sent out a press release saying that requesting everybody respect her privacy at both her home and her place of work. While other jurors have chosen to comment, which is their prerogative, that is not her desire at this time. Given her public service for the weeks of trial, she earned through her public service the right to have her wishes respected. She took the juror oath and that all the subsequent court's instructions seriously and believes she followed them appropriately. She now wishes freedom from contact and harassment and requests the efforts to contact her at her home or work come to an immediate end. They have requested the assistance of the Colleton County Sheriff's Department, and he said any further questions come to his office. So clearly she's being harassed not only at her place of employment, but at her private home, which is a bridge too far.
And Gigi, since we have you and you're on a roll here, what was your positive takeaway from this whole experience?
personally?
Sure.
Okay. Well, I mean, for me, it was like I talked about this on my podcast yesterday, the day before. I don't know, the days all run together.
I think it
but
was 2 days ago, but yeah.
okay, yeah. But for me personally, other than the fact that justice was served, I have to say, all the media people that I met that were there for the whole 6 weeks, there was not an air of competition there. It was people sharing information. There was no, I'm better than you, I have more viewers than you, whatever. It was really just almost like, I don't want to say college, because you got Alex Murdaugh right in the middle of it. So it's kind of like college, where you're sleeping somewhere strange for 6 weeks and you're learning a lot of new stuff and you got new friends, but then you got Alex right in the middle. But it was such a supportive environment for the media. I was very new to live stuff, never had done it before. And so I had people that were seasoned veterans just giving me tips. And so I think the good thing for me is seeing that everybody was passionate for justice and the truth. And then just also how it wasn't a competition. It literally was about the facts, reporting the facts. And if you heard something I didn't hear, well, let me tell you. They say, let me just tell you what was up. It's not, you know what I'm saying? It was just that camaraderie, however you say it. I need more coffee.
Camaraderie.
But, yeah, there you go. Thank you.
I'm cracking up because I worked in New York City for the Fox station, and I worked for Fox News out of DC. People would have worn ice skates there to slice your neck when you were down.
It just wasn't like that. And I think a lot of it too is there is that Southern hospitality in the South. And so, the big people came in the first week and the last week. And then it was kind of all of us local-ish. We're all neighbors in South Carolina, but it really was just such a cool environment, I guess, for just sharing information and just lifting each other up. So I thought that was really cool. I've heard rumors about media and how cutthroat it can be, and it was the exact opposite. So for me, it was good in that regard, and that a lot of people taught me a ton of stuff.
And Gigi, you did an awesome job. You should be proud of yourself. And
Thank you.
You became a bit of a rock star. You got people.
Oh my gosh. My kids are mortified. I was in Costco the other day. Somebody came up to me and my daughter was like, "Oh my God, I'm going over to like the garden aisle."
I love that. Anytime you can embarrass your kids, it's a good day. 5 Green Acres writes, yes, Stephen was placed in the road. Steve, we're going to have you address this in a moment, but I like this comment here. Rebecca 365. Sometimes you go back and they're just simplistic things that make a lot of sense. I heard on a talk show a while back, how did Alec know what time he needed to lie about if he didn't do it? And that just makes so much sense. So, Steve, was he placed in the road? And did you get anything positive out of this whole trial experience as a trial watcher?
I do not believe Stephen was placed in the road. I believe, based on the photographs that I have seen at the scene of his death, there was too much blood there. If he had been killed somewhere else and dumped in the road, he would have bled out. There wouldn't have been as nearly the amount of blood that was present at the site of his body. That's just me. That's mine. So my belief is no, he was not placed in the road. As for what good did I get, I would tell you that, I for years I've taught cops courtroom survival techniques as a witness. And I kind of wish some of the cops that testified in this case had attended that class. But that part aside, I think that I've always said that a jury is really nothing more than 12 people who are too stupid to get out of jury duty. And the Casey Anthony trial kind of cemented that for me. Because I was ready to get in a car and drive down to Florida and power up that generator for the chair myself when they came back not guilty. And I was stunned. Part of me was really afraid that this jury, some of them, at least one, would believe the bull and the drama and the theatrics that Alec portrayed from the witness stand. And I am so grateful that they saw through that. That gives me hope. It gives me hope that you can put 12 people into a box and ask them to judge the case based solely on what they hear from the witness stand. Because I didn't think that was going to happen. I think they were going to be, nobody was sequestered, which I don't understand that. And maybe it's too late in the podcast to throw that out to our ladies here. But why witnesses were allowed to sit in the courtroom, listen to other people testify, then get up on the stand themselves.
Amy Z, what is the answer to that? What is the answer to that?
It just blew my mind. That's my positive. Gave me faith back in juries.
Sorry, I was muted. The answer is no. Neither side requested it.
I just don't understand that. Don't understand that.
It's my number. I have like trial motions. It's number 4. Always requested.
I think they just assumed that they were going to go home and watch it on TV anyway because it was being live streamed, and so they didn't even bother with it.
Yeah, I think so too.
Maybe, maybe, but I was just stunned to see people sitting in the gallery, and the next minute they're being called up. Yeah. I was like, what kind of trial is this?
Dixie Anderson writes, he admitted at sentencing that they, Maggie and Paul, haunt him all day and night. Why would he feel this way if he is not the murderer? So many questions. Amy Lawrence Lovely, who's not far from me at the moment in the great state of Florida. You're a glass half full kind of person. What did you take away from this that was positive?
Amy Z laughs at me. All of our friends laugh at me because I'm so the glass is half full kind of girl. I mean, I'm a criminal defense attorney, but I don't take cases where people hurt women, children, old people, or animals. I think they do haunt him. I think he did kill his family, and I think he did it for no reason except for his own personal gain. And I hope that they have some kind of peace wherever that is. And I really do. I pray for Alex Murdaugh. I do pray for him. I'm not saying that he gets forgiveness from the family from his family, but I mean, I hope that he becomes a better person. I'm not necessarily hopeful. I think we were all hoping that he didn't kill him. And when the reality set in, we were all just so disappointed and heartbroken, not really for him, but we were heartbroken for his child and his wife, because the reality is that he did it. I think he is haunted by them. I don't think there is a why. He's the why. And it kind of comes back to when he said, the moment we were all looking for in that trial when he was on that stand was for him to say, I feel responsible. I've shit a lot of people out of money. Yep. I've stolen a lot of people's money. I've bought a lot of drugs, and my family paid the ultimate price for that, and I'm responsible. Well, I didn't pull the trigger. That's what it was, because that makes sense. But when he got up there and he said it was this boat vigilante bullshit, he was telling the truth, because that's exactly why he killed him.
Betty Blue writes, passionate lawyers are the best people. You just saw 2 of them on our podcast. Amy Zimmercheck, who is cousin Eddie's attorney. She works 21 hours a day, never takes a break, 7 days a week, only to come on our podcast. So we thank Amy Z. Amy Lawrence Lovely, she's a different story. She takes some time off. She has fun. Part of the Lovely law firm. And you got Gigi Mi-Kelvey, a courtroom star reporter, and her podcast, Pretty Lies Alibis. Do not miss it. And Steve Peterson, a diehard Boston Bruins, Red Sox, Celtics fan.
No.
And also, no, not Celtics?
I don't care about the Celtics, nor do I care about the Patriots. I care about real sports, hockey and baseball.
Wow, look at that. Who knew? I exaggerated. Who knew? But he's done some investigating for Stephen Smith's family, and he was the longest tenured DEA agent in all the world when he retired. And he'll tell you that's because he was the oldest. Is that right, Steve?
Well, I was the oldest street agent in the world. I was still working the street at an age that I didn't need to be doing that anymore.
Jay, I'm going to Idaho. Yes.
Yeah,
Can I just say, too, I want to add before we leave, yes, I'm going to Idaho next month for Lori Vallow.
By the way, we're going to be covering that, and I'm going to hit up Gigi because I think I'm going to go out there for openings.
Oh, nice. Can I just say, too, the other thing, aside from the media just really banding together, I think one of the biggest things to come out of this trial that's positive is the good old boy system took a big hit, and Alec was held responsible for the first time in his life. And I think, too, it's a little redemption to the legal profession, because I know a lot of lawyers who are like, man, this just makes us look terrible. And the oath he took, they were personally upset that he just shamed the profession. So I think that the good old boy system being taken down a few notches, and then the fact that he's going to the pokey for the rest of his life, I think that's a good thing.
I just want you to know that, Joel, I love you. Stephen, I love you. But I get to tell all my friends that I was on this podcast with Gigi.
Oh my gosh, you're awesome. I
love
appreciate
it.
that. Somebody told me I sucked earlier, so that kind of counterbalances that.
She's the new Eric Bland. Gigi's the new Eric Bland.
No, she's Gigi, and Eric Bland could be the new whatever.
No, I'm just Gigi. I love you, Dragon Zone. I do.
Hey, if you see Gigi in South Carolina, you better get a picture, and then you got to tag us on Insta at Surviving the Survivor, and I'll post it, or I guess I'll be tagged. And look at this right here, right on cue. Gigi is a rock star.
Thank you,
He's a
Sarah.
total rock
You guys
star.
are so sweet. I appreciate all your kind words.
Quick programming note. Dan Markel, he went to Harvard undergrad. He went to Harvard Law School. He was a professor at Florida State in the great state of Florida. 2014, he is shot twice in the head at point blank range. No one knows who did it. They finally figure out through a very long investigation, it was two hitmen. The intermediary was convicted. Both hitmen were convicted, and sitting in a jail cell in Tallahassee is the former brother-in-law, the ex-brother-in-law, Charlie Adelson. He's going on trial. Allegedly, his own mother may have been involved, as well as his sister, the ex-wife. And tomorrow we've got a guy named Carl Steinbeck on. He is a former JAG prosecutor in the military, extremely thorough, and he's got 120 reasons why Wendy Adelson, who he believes is the mastermind behind that horrific crime, should be indicted. And he's coming on with a couple other heavy hitters, including John Singer, a New York City attorney who's been following the case from the beginning, and Tallahassee's own Tim Jansen. That's where the crime took place. So tune in tomorrow night, live 7 p.m. Eastern. It's going to be a really interesting, wild, eye-opening show. And we will get back on Alex Murdaugh on Thursday. But until then, Amy Z is back. Love to see her. Love you, America.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.